Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're zeroing in on a really transformative moment in history, the independence and partition of India.
And we're not just scratching the surface.
No, definitely not. We're diving deep using a fantastic lens, a special exhibition held at the University of Cambridge called Freedom and Fragmentation.
Right. Images of independence, decolonization, and partition. It gives us access to some incredible source material.
So our mission today is to move beyond those, broad stroke summaries you usually get.
Exactly. We want to unpack the human stories, the diverse perspectives behind this huge historical shift using what was on display there.
Okay, so this Cambridge exhibition, tell us about the sources. What kind of material are we actually drawing on?
Well, the Center of South Asian Studies at Cambridge has this just staggering archive. We're talking over 100,000 photographs.
Wow.
Yeah, plus around 600 written collections, 900 maps, even thousands of hours of film footage.
So a huge amount to work with.
A massive amount. It covers something like 200 years, stretching way back into the British Raj and then right through to the early decades after independence.
And this specific exhibition, Freedom and Fragmentation, it was timed for the 70th anniversary of independence, wasn't it?
That's right. Back in 2017, it ran until late October that year. It was a way of using the archive to really reflect on that moment.
So walking through it, you'd see glimpses of the big names. Gandhi, Nehru, Jinnah.
Oh, absolutely. They're definitely represented. But what makes this collection and the exhibition so valuable is that it goes much wider.
How so?
It brings in stories often left out. For instance, female revolutionaries, Santi Ghose and Suniti Chowdhury, who assassinated a British magistrate.
I've heard of them incredibly young, weren't they?
Teenagers, yeah. And then there are the stories of refugees, millions forced from their homes during partition, personal accounts from people whose lives were just completely overturned by the British withdrawal.
That 200-year span really helps put it all in context.
It really does. You see the buildup, the tensions, the different threads leading to that point.
And it was a breaking point. I think one of the co-curators, Dr. Edward Anderson, described partition as profoundly painful and traumatic.
That's putting it mildly. The human cost is almost impossible to really grasp. Hundreds of thousands killed.
And the displacement?
Up to 14 million people.
Right.
Think about it, the single largest migration in human history, happening amidst chaos and violence.
Professor Joya Chatterjee, the director at the center, she talked about that strange mix of feelings, didn't she?
She did. This collision of euphoria, freedom at last, but simultaneously, this absolute agony and horror for millions caught up in the violence and displacement. Relief and terror side by side.
And the outcome, of course, was two nations, India and Pakistan.
Born out of that upheaval.
Now, Professor Chatterjee also raised a really crucial point about the archive itself, didn't she? About perspective.
Yes, and it's vital. She cautioned that this vast collection is, well, primarily seen through the eyes of the elite, mostly white British men.
So officials, administrators, that sort of thing.
Predominantly, yes. Which means we have to be critical. Whose voices aren't we hearing as clearly? Whose experiences might be obscured or downplayed?
It's a necessary filter to apply when we look at these materials.
Absolutely. Doesn't diminish the value. These are rare insights, but it reminds us that history isn't a single, simple story. There are always missing pieces.
Thinking about the different ways people sought independence, Gandhi's approach is obviously central. The nonviolent non-cooperation.
Satyagraha. And his hunger strikes, which apparently caused real anxiety for the British. They feared widespread unrest if anything happened to him.
But that wasn't the only strategy on the table, was it?
Far from it. The exhibition highlighted the contrast with revolutionary societies. Groups who believed, quite frankly, that violence was the only language the British would understand. They aimed to force them out.
So a completely different philosophy.
Completely. And interestingly, some of these revolutionary groups used specifically Hindu oaths, which effectively excluded Muslims.
Which must have caused friction with the mainstream parties.
Well, the mainstream political movements, like Congress, generally distanced themselves from what they called extremists. They were focused on building Hindu-Muslim unity within their nonviolent campaigns. So you had these parallel, sometimes conflicting streams.
Did the exhibition show actual examples of revolutionary actions?
Oh, yes. There was mention of a handmade hand grenade seized from a young man named Dinesh Chandra Majumdar back in 1930.
What was it like?
Apparently, quite crudely made from aluminium, filled with pieces of metal designed to act like bullets on detonation. Gives you a sense of the desperation, maybe. Majumdar was later executed. And there were forensic photos from another incident, the assassination of Lieutenant Colonel Simpson in 1930.
Where did that happen?
Right inside the Writers' Building in Calcutta, the heart of British administration there, carried out by a group called the Bengal Volunteers.
What was their motivation?
The stated reason was the brutal conditions inside British-run jails in India. It was a direct, violent protest against that treatment.
And then we have Santi Gauze and Suniti Chaudhuri again, assassinating magistrate Charles Stevens.
Yes, 17 and 15 years old, they apparently went to his office, pulled out a concealed weapon. It's quite shocking, the age, the determination.
Did these actions have popular support?
It's complex. While mainstream politics focused elsewhere, the exhibition notes that large crowds often turned up for the funerals of executed revolutionaries. That suggests a certain level of, perhaps, admiration or sympathy in parts of the population.
The exhibition also touched on the Jallianwala Bagh massacre in Amritsar. That feels like such a pivotal, horrifying moment.
Absolutely, a definite turning point. There was mention of a letter by Sir John Smith, written right after the massacre, published in the Observer newspaper in the UK.
What did it say?
It really laid bare how the massacre shattered British legitimacy and moral authority, especially in the Punjab region. The sheer brutality just couldn't be ignored or easily explained away.
So you have Gandhi's big campaigns, boycotts, village upliftment, breaking unjust laws like the salt tax.
Running alongside liberal reform efforts.
But also these militant revolutionaries continuing to capture the public imagination.
Exactly. The coexistence of these different approaches is key to understanding the period.
Now, you mentioned Cambridge University earlier. It seems it played a surprisingly central role as an intellectual hub.
It really did. So many individuals who went on to shape independent India and Pakistan spent time there developing their ideas.
But not necessarily agreeing on the future.
Definitely not. That's the crucial part. The visions for post-British India were often wildly different, even among those educated in the same place.
Any specific examples mentioned?
Chaudhuri Rahmat Ali is a key one. He was at Cambridge when he wrote the pamphlets that actually coined the name Pakistan.
Really? He came up with the name there.
That's right. And his grave is actually in Cambridge City Cemetery. It's a tangible link to that moment of intense ideological debate.
The exhibition also placed 1947 in the wider context of decolonization, right? Mentioning Bangladesh.
Yes. It acknowledged that the story didn't end neatly in 47. Most of Britain's empire was dismantled by the late 60s. And then, of course, East Pakistan fought for and won its independence as Bangladesh in 1971 after a horrific liberation war. It shows the ongoing repercussions.
And the symbolism of the India-Pakistan border itself. The Wagah border ceremony is pretty famous.
It is. It's such a strange spectacle, isn't it? This highly choreographed, very nationalistic, almost aggressive display.
Yeah, lots of high kicks and staring.
Exactly. Full of jingoism. But at the same time, it's a functioning border crossing, a point of daily, necessary cooperation. It kind of encapsulates the whole complex relationship.
What about glimpses of life under the Raj? Did the exhibition offer insights there?
Yes, through contrasting images. There was a formal portrait, for example, of Colonel Showers and his wife in Jaipur around 1910.
Gives you that personal, elite British perspective.
Right. His family had a long military history in India. Mrs. Showers was apparently even at the Delhi Durbar.
Ah, the Durbar, that massive imperial spectacle.
Exactly. Those were all about projecting British power and permanence, this grand imperial display, even while anti-colonial feelings were rising. Seeing those images side by side, the personal portrait and the massive public ceremony, highlights the different facets of British rule.
There is an interesting point made in the source material about why, despite Gandhi's immense stature, the militant revolutionaries often seem to have a stronger hold on the popular imagination.
Yes, the suggestion was it came down to the stories. The revolutionaries' lives were often filled with drama disguises, secret plots, daring escapes, direct confrontations.
More exciting narratives, perhaps?
Perhaps. More like adventure stories in some ways, which might have had a powerful appeal compared to the slower, more methodical process of nonviolent resistance. And figures like Chandrasekhar Azad, often depicted with his gun, became lasting icons. That imagery resonated.
Let's talk about Allama Iqbal. He's often called an ideological founder of Pakistan, the national poet. But it seems his views were quite complex, especially on nationhood.
Extremely complex, and they definitely evolved. He's revered in Pakistan, no doubt. And his 1930 address to the Muslim League is famous for outlining a vision for a consolidated Muslim state in northwest India, a cornerstone of the two-nation theory.
But
But it's not quite that simple. Some Muslims in India at the time, particularly from the Ashraf elite, still saw him primarily as an Indian nationalist. And significantly, his later poetry actually moved away from the idea of the nation-state.
How so?
He started advocating for a broader pan-Islamic identity, a global Muslim community, or ummah, rather than distinct nations. There are famous lines where he critiques nationalism itself, calling the nation the biggest of the new gods.
So a shift from national identity to a religious transnational one.
Precisely. He wrote lines like, "China and Arab are ours, Hindustan is ours, we are Muslims, the whole world is our homeland." It suggests a rejection of borders in favor of this wider Islamic unity.
That's fascinating. Did he express other views that might seem surprising now?
Well, he had some pretty anti-democratic sentiments. There's a quote attributed to him basically saying democracy just counts heads. It doesn't weigh their worth.
Interesting. And what about his own background?
He acknowledged his Brahmin ancestry, interestingly enough, in some Persian couplets, talking about being a Brahmin's progeny, familiar with Sufi mysticism.
And his focus within the Muslim community.
Some interpretations suggest his writings often seem primarily concerned with Muslims of Ashraf background, those claiming foreign descent, which raises questions about how inclusive his vision was, even within the Muslim context.
And his views on education, particularly for women.
Yes, that's another complex area. There are verses where he expresses deep concern about the influence of Western education on girls, fearing it would make them lifeless or turn them away from traditional values and religion. He seemed worried about losing Eastern identity.
So a very layered figure, not easily categorized.
Not at all. Essential to Pakistan's founding narrative, but with views that shifted and contained internal tensions.
Okay, let's rewind further back. The sources also discuss the early phase of British rule, 1757 to 1857, setting the stage, really.
Absolutely crucial period. Britain's Industrial Revolution was kicking off, creating this huge need for raw materials and markets. India offered both.
And the political situation in India allowed them to step in.
Exactly. The Mughal Empire was weakening. There were internal power struggles. The East India Company exploited these divisions brilliantly. Through wars, treaties, alliances, outright annexation, they gradually took control.
And economically,
Is systematic exploitation. Land revenue policy squeezed farmers. Agriculture was forcibly commercialized. Grow indigo, grow cotton for our mills, not food for yourselves. Trade was monopolized.
how'd that work?
Buy Indian raw materials dirt cheap. Sell British manufactured goods back at high prices. Impose heavy duties on Indian goods trying to enter Britain while flooding India with British products. Even building railways and telegraphs was primarily about getting resources out more efficiently.
And the introduction of English education.
That was partly about creating a class of Indians to help them administer the country. Assistants, clerks, interpreters.
The growth of Calcutta, or Kolkata, seems symbolic of this era.
It is. From just 3 villages to a major administrative and commercial hub, dominated by Fort William. It embodies the British presence, and maps from the 19th century show vividly how independent states were gradually swallowed up by British territory.
The battles of Plassey and Buxar are always mentioned as key turning points.
Foundational victories for the British, especially in securing Bengal, which was incredibly wealthy. Plassey in 1757 involved installing their own puppet ruler, Mir Jafar, after bribing his commander.
And Buxar.
That was 1764. Mir Jafar's successor, Mir Qasim, tried to assert some independence, so the British replaced him. He then allied with the Nawab of Awadh and the Mughal emperor, but the British defeated their combined forces decisively at Buxar. That victory really cemented British military dominance in the region.
Were there specific policies used for annexation besides outright war?
Oh, yes. 2 infamous ones were the Doctrine of Lapse and the Subsidiary Alliance system.
Explain those.
The Subsidiary Alliance forced Indian rulers to pay for British troops stationed in their territory and accept a British residence advisor, effectively controlling their foreign policy and military. The Doctrine of Lapse, used aggressively by Lord Dalhousie, stated that if a ruler died without a direct natural heir, their state would be annexed by the British.
That's how they took states like Jhansi.
Exactly. Jhansi, Satara, Nagpur. Rani Lakshmi Bai's resistance was directly sparked by this. Awadh was annexed too, using the pretext of misgovernance, which caused huge resentment.
And all this economic activity was reshaping India's role in the world.
Completely. The Industrial Revolution in Britain turned India into its economic colony. The East India Company's trade monopoly was eventually ended, partly due to pressure from British manufacturers who wanted direct access.
What was the impact on traditional Indian industries like textiles?
Devastating. India went from being a major exporter of textiles to a net importer of cheap, machine-made British cloth. Local weavers like the Barriargaria community mentioned in the sources simply couldn't compete. Their livelihoods were destroyed.
And the forced shift to cash crops.
Terrible consequences. Indigo cultivation, often forced, exhausted the soil. Opium was grown for the controversial trade with China. Tea plantations involved often brutal conditions for workers. Cotton farmers had to sell their raw cotton cheap to Britain, then buy back expensive finished cloth. It bred deep resentment.
So against this backdrop, the first stirrings of modern nationalism start to appear.
Yes, you see figures like Dadabhai Naoroji starting to talk about Swaraj or self-rule. Bal Gangadhar Tilak famously declared, "Swaraj is my birthright and I shall have it." He also strongly opposed the British education system, seeing it as denigrating Indian culture.
And the revolutionary groups also emerged from this context.
Right. Groups like Jugantar, led by figures such as Bhagat Jatin. There were various conspiracy cases, the Alipore bomb case involving Aurobindo Ghosh, the Delhi conspiracy targeting the viceroy, the Howrah gang case. These show that a more militant underground was active early on.
What about World War I? How did that affect things?
Initially, there was actually quite a lot of support for Britain from mainstream Indian nationalists, hoping for political concessions in return. India contributed significantly in terms of soldiers and resources.
But that changed.
Yes, disillusionment grew. And there were attempts by revolutionaries, like the Ghadar Party, to use the war as an opportunity for rebellion, the so-called Hindu-German conspiracy. They tried to incite mutinies, like the failed one planned for February 1915 and the Singapore mutiny later that year. These were largely thwarted, but show the continuing revolutionary undercurrent.
Then in 1915, Gandhi returns to India. That feels like a major shift.
Absolutely pivotal. He brought his experiences from South Africa, where he developed and successfully used Hachigagra nonviolent resistance against discriminatory laws.
Did he immediately launch into nationwide campaigns?
Not quite. His initial approach was influenced by his mentor, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, who advised him to travel India and understand the situation first. He respected figures like Tilak, but developed his own distinct philosophy of civil disobedience, aiming to mobilize the masses in a new, nonviolent way.
Around the same time, the demand for Pakistan was solidifying. The Lahore Resolution.
Yes, the Muslim League passed the Lahore Resolution in 1940, formally calling for separate Muslim states in the northwest and northeast.
Was that universally supported among Muslims?
No, definitely not. It's important to remember the All India Azad Muslim Conference, also held in 1940. They strongly opposed partition and advocated for a united, independent India. They represented a significant strand of nationalist Muslim opinion.
So multiple viewpoints within communities as well.
Always. History is rarely monolithic.
Moving towards the end game, World War II seems to have accelerated everything.
Massively. When the viceroy, Linlithgow, declared India at war without consulting any Indian leaders, the Congress ministries resigned in protest.
But the Muslim League supported the war effort.
Yes, as did the Sikhs. This created a political divide. Then you had Subhas Chandra Bose forming the Indian National Army, INA, with Japanese support, fighting against the British in Burma and northeast India.
The INA trials after the war were a big deal, weren't they?
Huge. The British charged INA members with treason, but there was massive public outcry in India. Congress leaders like Nehru defended them, and eventually most were released. It further fueled anti-British sentiment.
And there was unrest in the regular armed forces, too.
Yes. The Royal Indian Navy Mutiny in 1946 was very significant. Sailors rose up protesting conditions and discrimination. It spread quickly. Although Congress and the Muslim League persuaded the sailors to surrender, it sent a clear signal to the British that they couldn't rely on the loyalty of Indian troops anymore.
So the pressure was immense.
Immense. Finally, the British government, under Clement Attlee, committed to independence. Lord Mountbatten was sent as the last viceroy, and on June 3, 1947, he announced the plan: independence, but with partition.
Leading to the Indian Independence Act.
Passed in July 1947, setting the date. Pakistan was created on August 14th. India became independent on August 15th.
And India chose to remain in the Commonwealth.
Yes, establishing what was sometimes called a new special relationship with the UK, despite the colonial past.
Going back slightly, how did the Muslim League gain so much traction during the war years?
Several factors. Their investigations into the alleged mistreatment of Muslims in Congress-run provinces before the war raised fears of Hindu domination. Linlithgow strategically boosted Jinnah's standing, treating him as an equal to Gandhi and referring to Congress as a Hindu organization.
Politically expedient for the British.
It certainly helped divide the nationalist movement. Also, the Cripps mission in 1942, offering Dominion status after the war, included a clause that no part of India would be forced to join the new entity against its will.
Which appealed to the League.
It implicitly acknowledged the possibility of partition, though both the League and Congress rejected the overall Cripps offer for different reasons. But it strengthened the League's position.
The post-war Labour government in Britain was keen on independence, sending the cabinet mission in 1946.
Yes, Attlee wanted a solution. The cabinet mission tried to find a compromise for a united India with strong provincial autonomy, but couldn't bridge the gap between Congress and the League.
And the mutinies were happening around the same time.
Exactly. The RAF mutinies in early 1946, followed by the larger Navy mutiny, really drove home the urgency for the British. Their control was crumbling.
So independence and partition happened. What were the immediate aftermaths?
Well, both new nations joined the UN. Pakistan admitted in September 47. India continued its existing membership. The division of provinces, especially Punjab, was brutal, overseen by the Boundary Commission led by Cyril Radcliffe, who had little knowledge of India. The lines drawn caused immense suffering and displacement.
Are there efforts to capture those experiences?
Yes, thankfully. Organizations like the 1947 Partition Archive collect oral histories. There's the Partition Museum in Amritsar. Books like Fida Puri's Partition Voices focus on British South Asian experiences. It's vital work to preserve these memories.
It's interesting to contrast the later nationalist movements with the very early political associations in India.
Very different beasts. Early groups like the Zamindari Association or a Landholders Society from 1838 or the Bengal British India Society, they were primarily focused on the interests of specific elites, usually landowners.
Provincial rather than national.
Mostly, yes. Even when they merged into the British India Association in 1851, Dadabhai Naoroji's East Indian Association, founded in London in 1866, tried to influence British opinion, but still wasn't quite a mass movement.
So the Indian National Congress, INC, founded in 1885, was a culmination of sorts.
Yes, it emerged from a growing sense of shared grievance. The terrible famines in the 1860s and 70s, alongside increasingly discriminatory colonial laws, created a wider sense of alienation and the need for a national platform.
And we can't really understand the INC without looking back at the 1857 uprising, often called the First War of Independence.
It looms large. By 1857, the British were the paramount power. Indian princes were largely puppets. Dalhousie's doctrine of lapse, as we discussed, had swallowed states like Jhansi, Satara, Awadh.
Causing huge resentment among the rulers and the people.
Absolutely. The annexation of Awadh was particularly galling, justified as being for the good of the governed, but it led to higher taxes, displacement of nobles and soldiers, and confiscation of estates belonging to local landowners, the Talukars.
And the company's own soldiers, the sepoys.
Many sepoys came from Awadh. They felt the economic pinch, but also the humiliation of their homeland being annexed. Plus, the disrespect shown to the nominal Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah, and the British plans to end the Mughal title after his death added to the discontent. It felt like an attack on their identity and heritage.
And the underlying economic drain.
The absentee sovereignty being ruled from London, with India's wealth flowing out. It was a fundamental grievance that fueled the 1857 revolt.
So bringing it all together, Mahatma Gandhi's role remains central to the story of how independence was finally achieved.
Undeniably. His philosophy of nonviolent resistance, his leadership in massive campaigns like the Non-Cooperation Movement, the Salt March, Quit India, he managed to unite millions across religious, caste, and class lines in a way no one else had.
His ability to mobilize was extraordinary.
It truly was. His approach fundamentally shaped the final decades of the struggle.
Well, this deep dive, drawing on that Cambridge exhibition and the wider history, it really underscores the sheer complexity, doesn't it? Independence and partition weren't simple events.
Not at all. It was this tangled web of political maneuvering, economic forces, revolutionary actions, nonviolent struggle, individual sacrifices, and ultimately immense human tragedy alongside the joy of freedom.
To really get it, you have to look at all those threads, the elite views, the ordinary lives, the competing visions.
Exactly. And the legacy is still playing out today, isn't it? In the relationship between India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and the UK. It's living history.
So a final thought for everyone listening, thinking about all these different perspectives we've touched on, how does that change how you view nationalism or identity or the echoes of colonialism in the world now? And perhaps, following Professor Chatterjee's point, what voices might still be missing from our understanding of this incredibly pivotal, transformative era? Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.